Welcome, critters. I'm Claire Jones, your devoted host of the Sacred Reading CR podcast, where we discuss and examine Critical Role episodes, plot lines, players, and characters through the lens of sacred reading practices. This particular episode is about Campaign 1, Episode 24, Part 2. And joining me today is Petall.
Hello.
And the icebreaker for today is, have you ever met a celebrity?
I have. Um, there's been a lot of them, none of them have been huge celebrities, but at Gen Con, I've met a few people who are somewhat big in D&D circles. I got to meet some of the people who were on Unprepared Casters, which is one of my favorite D&D shows. I also at Gen Con this year walked right past Travis McElroy. We were a foot away from each other. I was he was clearly going somewhere, so I didn't stop him, and I was just too shocked at the moment of that was Travis McElroy. So I didn't meet him, but I
Breathed
passed
the
by
same
him.
air.
Breathed the same air. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. I mean, most of the time when you ask this question, it's not major celebrities,
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised that yours are D&D people.
Yeah.
So I worked at a theater for an internship after college, and so I didn't meet him directly, but I'm 1 degree removed from Kevin Bacon. So I can definitely put that on my resume.
Nice.
But the actors who came to the theater while I was there, one of which was Harry Groner, and he is the mayor from Buffy the Vampire Slayer that turns into the big snake monster at the end of their high school saga. And so I talked to him a few times. And then I was also at the same theater in an elevator with the dad from Smart House, that Disney movie from back in the day. So I didn't talk to him, but I definitely breathed the same air. And then I went to the Jocks Machina event that they threw for the release of Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. When they released that book for D&D, they did this whole release thing in LA, and they did a Jocks Machina special one shot with Travis and Joe and everyone, a few wrestlers apparently. And so I saw that. I did not take the chance to speak to Taliesin Jaffe. He showed up, but I just did not join the line because I wasn't really a Taliesin fan at that point in time, and I regret it nowadays. But
fair.
The most exciting portion of that was when I was waiting outside to go into the event, and we're just milling around in the courtyard area. Travis Willingham walked past me, and he was trying to skirt through the crowd and not make any not be noticed. He had his hat down, and he was just kind of acting like he was going somewhere really fast. And so he literally walked right in front of me, and same with you, I just froze. I was like oh my god, Travis Willingham. And the girl that was standing next to me, he went past, and we were both just open-jawed watching him walk. And she turns to me and she goes, "Was that?" And I was like, "Yes, it was." And we both had a little squeeze session after that.
Nice.
But I think those are my notable ones. I'm also 1 degree removed from Lin-Manuel Miranda because my stepbrother worked with him in the past. So, but yeah, those are the notable ones. It's funny how you always have those odd connections, like the 6 degrees removed from Kevin Bacon. I'm one, so I can claim that victory.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was really interesting to go to that one Jocks Machina event because, I mean, who's gonna see that in person? Travis, Joe Manganiello, and the wrestlers. I didn't even know who the wrestlers were, but they were quite beefy.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, those are my stories.
Nice.
Well, please join us as we embark on this exciting adventure in story analysis and self-reflection in order to deepen our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. As always, we love hearing your own insights and stories as well, so please comment, like, subscribe, and ready? All right, let's dive in. Vox Machina have returned to Amon after a trip to Vasselheim and have spent some downtime in the city, shopping and having conversations with various contacts as they wait for a dinner that is scheduled to occur within a week's time. The second half of this episode starts with the group waking up after a long rest in their keep, Grayskull Keep. Grog makes his beard check successfully and shows it off to the rest of the group very happily. Grog also declares that he is not touching water again after the incident in Percy's workshop, but he is now a fan of powder, and Tiberius tells him that he is not a chinchilla. Tiberius also feeds Lockheed a bit and notices that his color is getting better. Scanlan interrupts them and tells them to get going, so Tiberius starts casting his circle of teleportation to Craghammer. Vex, Tiberius, Scanlan, and Grog step into the circle while Percy, Vax, and Keyleth stay behind. The Craghammer group arrives in a dark room, a basement of some kind, and Tiberius casts light on Lockheed's tail so that they can see better. Vex asks if the Thunderbrands know they're coming, and Tiberius reassures her that he showed them the amulet, so they should be aware of their arrival. Vex checks for traps anyway to make sure, but rolls low, so they continue on. They make their way up to the second floor and find a figure, the same individual that Tiberius had spoken to previously. He greets them, saying he waited up all night for them, and now they're interrupting his breakfast. Tiberius starts to apologize, and the dwarf waves him off, telling them to come on. He leads them into an old house with a lot of cultivated cave plant life. They are brought to the main foyer area, and the dwarf asks them for the amulet. Tiberius grabs it from the bag of holding, but checks with Vex and Scanlan first to make sure that the dwarf is not the one that they are expecting money from. And they say, no, that's someone else. Tiberius says, good, I didn't want to say the wrong thing. And Scanlan says, don't worry, you will. Tiberius then shows the amulet to the dwarf, asking to trade it for a favor. The dwarf says he already gave them a favor, entry to his family's household with a teleportation sigil. The dwarf then accuses them of extorting him, and Tiberius rushes to deny it, trying to explain that their magic carpet has lost its enchantment and they're looking for someone to re-enchant it. Tiberius hands them the amulet, asking if they would be willing to help hit them with the carpet. He rolls low, though, but the dwarf isn't really paying attention to him anyway, transfixed by the amulet in his hand. The dwarf thanks them for returning the amulet and says that they have enchanted a carpet before, but the materials and the time put into it is very pricey. He says that it should take a year and 50,000 gold pieces to enchant the carpet, and Vex freaks out again, saying that they should have treated the carpet better. Grog interrupts them, asking if they should go get their money now, speaking of. They are escorted out of House Thunderbrand, and they head down to Greyspine's office. They enter and find him at his desk looking out over the quarry of Craghammer. He greets them, saying he's surprised to see them alive. Vex assures him that they did not die and in fact succeeded in slaying the creatures that were terrorizing their minds. She falters, still bemoaning the loss of the carpet, and Scanlan takes over, saying that it's her time of the month. Vex says that they came to collect their money, and Greyspine agrees as Grog starts taking out pieces of creatures from their bag of holding to show that they slayed them. Vex states the price at 30,000 gold pieces, but Greyspine corrects her, saying that it was 25,000. Tiberius asks for the extra 5,000 since the mission sucked. And Greyspine starts to get mad, saying he doesn't even know what they fought down there. So they start listing all of the nasty creatures they had found, including a beholder. Greyspine says, and yet you are all still alive. And Scanlan says, well, some of us. He says, as you recall, there were more of us. And Grog starts pretending to cry, laying it on thick. Vex starts thinking about the carpet and starts crying real tears, and Scanlan says, before you braid us, we lost 2 of our members and a bear. Vex starts crying harder. Grayspine questions them further, asking what else they encountered. They tell him about the Illithid and the Elder Brain, as well as the Duragar. Vex makes a persuasion check and rolls an 11. Grayspine says that since they left, they haven't had one incursion from the mines, and he believes most of their tale. He offers them 18,000 gold pieces, and Scanlan casts suggestion on him. Grayspine rolls a natural 1, and Scanlan suggests that he honors the original deal. Grayspine agrees to the original 25,000, but if he hears a single bad word about their exchange, then he will come for his money. Grog takes the Duragar arm he had pulled from the bag of holding and folds back the fingers to make a thumbs up sign with it. Grayspine laughs at it and gives them the money. Vex thanks him for the money and says that it won't make up for the lost lives, but it helps. Grayspine says that he's sorry for the losses and maybe it means they will be less stupid in the future. Grog says they should get going, and Scanlan urges Grayspine to remember the blood they've spilled for his city. Vex names drops Vox Machina and gives a shout out to Gilmore's glorious goods as they leave. Grayspine tells them to get out of his office. And they leave to go cast the circle of teleportation to go back to Amon. Meanwhile, in Amon, Vax and Trinket went to the nearest shop, and Vax has spent his time furiously tying pink bows all throughout Trinket's fur. Keyleth joins in and adds braids and the flowers the entire time that the Craghammer group is gone. Percy comes up for lunch in the meantime and finds them in the middle of this, asking them what is going on. Percy demands to know if Trinket is comfortable with it, and Trinket gives a mournful growl. Vax feeds Trinket a piece of chocolate, letting Trinket lick his face, and Percy tells Keyleth to find him when she has a moment. The moment she notices that the rest of the group has returned from Craghammer, Keyleth runs down to the workshop to find Percy. As they enter, Tiberius asks Scanlan to speak with Alora with him, and Scanlan says, "Sorry, I must be asleep. Are you planning something ahead of time?" Tiberius says yes, he figured he could chill out a bit and run it by the man with the mouth first. Scanlan says, "You've come to the right place." He also asks, "Isn't this the woman that you fancy?" Tiberius says yes, but this is more business. This is about business in this situation. He says that he wants to confess that they were the ones to steal her magic carpet in the first place. And since there seems to be no other way to fix it, apparently, maybe they can ask her about re-enchanting it. At that point, they all look up and find Trinket sitting in the center of the main foyer covered in pink ribbons. Vex says that he looks very cute, but needs to get the ribbons off of him immediately. She slaps Vax for what he did, and Tiberius takes a still image of Vex standing next to Trinket. Vex puts the money they got into the party funds, and Vax asks for 1,200. Tiberius tacking on that he wants some too. Vex gets worried, asking if she should just split all of the party funds right then and there. Scanlan suggests that they all get a stipend of 1,500 and call it even. Vex gives them the money, and Trinket starts pulling the bows out of his fur. Keyleth helps Percy in his workshop on a variety of projects while the rest of them chat about what they want to do to prepare for the dinner with the Briarwoods. They discuss it for a bit, whether or not they should let Sovereign Uriel know that the Briarwoods are suspect, but decide to at least tell Seek or Assume that Percy will be attending in disguise. Vax says that as much as he wants to see Percy unload his guns into the Briarwoods, maybe Percy should go disguised as Vax, and Vax could use his stealth skills to take one of them out behind the scenes. Scanlan also suggests that they have an attack word, and they decide on Jenga. Keyleth says that she doesn't want to stand in between Percy and his revenge, but asks whether he is sure that this is what he wants. Percy says he doesn't know what he wants beyond seeing them. He says he just wants to listen and watch. Keyleth asks if they should capture the Briarwoods and drag them back to the cell in Grayskull Keep, and Tiberius says, "Watch it, Minxie." Percy says that they will just have to see what happens. Vax asks if Percy believes the Briarwoods to be evil in the purest sense, and Percy says, "Yes, I do." Scanlan says, "We don't even need that much. If you say to kill someone, we'd probably do it." Grog says, "Amen." So they spend the next 6 days preparing. Vex trains Trinket to roly-poly in his armor so that he can bludgeon people. Scanlan gets business cards designed for them. Percy continues working on his projects in his workshop. Vax pays off his debt to Gilmore. Grog grows his beard some more, and then Vax shaves off half of it in the middle of the night. Liam and Travis, I'm not even saying Vax and Grog because it was definitely Liam and Travis, argue a bit about whether or not Grog would even know that Vax did it. And Travis says that Grog might not even be smart enough to know it, but he can still assume that it was Vax. Percy finishes up his tinkering with help from a lightning bolt from Keyleth and tests it out by shocking Tiberius. Tiberius mumbles unintelligently, and Keyleth casts Cure Wounds on him, and Percy calls his new device Diplomacy. Vex rolls a natural 20 as she trains Trinket, and Tiberius teaches Lockheed some more tricks, then picks up his knife glaive thing that he had commissioned in the meantime. The morning of the dinner arrives, and they have been notified that it will be a very fancy event, so they don their fancy robes and dresses, while Grog takes a curtain and wraps it around himself like a toga. He also practices his curtsy, and Tiberius joins in, and that's when they realize that Grog hasn't bathed in a week because of his new fear of water. Tiberius prestidigitates him. God, I hate that word. Prestidigitates him to clear away the grime and smell, and Grog freaks out, running around like he expects it to hurt him. They convince him that he is now immune to water and it will no longer harm him, and he calms down. Tiberius also uses some dust of illusion to alter the toga into a nicer robe and uses some to balance out Grog's half beard that he's rocking now. Grog offers a tankard of ale to Vax, and when Vax hands it back to him, Grog crushes it in his grip threateningly, and then they all head over to the ballast in the Cloud Top district of Amon. To prepare, Percy disguises himself as Vax, Keyleth gives everyone flower corsages, Scanlan casts invisibility on Vax, and Grog hands a potion of climbing to Vax, telling him, "Don't die." The palace guards let them all in, and Seeker Assume greets them immediately, saying he wishes to speak with them before the dinner. Assume asks if they're missing one of their members, and Vex tells him that Percy had to stay home because he was feeling under the weather, with Scanlan adding that he had the runs. They are led into an empty meeting room, and Assume tells them that the Briarwoods should be arriving around dusk, which is soon. He says they should be addressed as Lord Silas Briarwood and Lady Delilah Briarwood, and tell them to do their best to not cause a scene during the dinner because Assume needs that time to do his own investigation. Assume asks Vax/Percy if he wishes to join him in the Selthing mission, and Vax/Percy responds that he wishes to go to the dinner and observe. He clears his throat, and Scanlan rushes to add that Vax Percy is also feeling under the weather to hide the difference of voice. Unfortunately, Vax Percy rolls low on his deception check, and Assume entreats them to be honest with him. Tiberius starts introducing himself in his usual way, and Vax Percy says it's all right and stops him. Scanlan lets Assume know that Vax Percy is not in fact Vax, with Vax Percy confirming that he is indeed Percy underneath the disguise. Assume says that he figured as much as soon as Vax Percy started speaking, asking where the real Vax is. Will the real Vax please stand up? They tell him that the real Vax is present, but stealthing. Assume speaks into the room. Vax, if you can hear me, follow me when the meal begins. I may have use for you. He tells them that the Briarwoods are on very good standing with Sovereign Uriel and the Council of Taldori, so Assume has sent two of his best gatherers into Wynandir to seek out more information on them. The gatherers have been gone for 3 days, so they won't get the information immediately, but he does know that after the Briarwoods took over Whitestone, many of the noble houses in the city were left empty and were consequently given to various friends of the Briarwoods. He has heard that these new nobles are not high-born or affiliated with the gentry at all. He tells them that almost all the people he has sent to Whitestone to investigate have either defected or quit, which is why he is very curious as to what is going on over there. He has also found that the paperwork that legitimizes the Briarwoods' takeover of Whitestone was officiated and signed months in advance of the demise of the DeRollo family. He entreats them again to be controlled throughout the dinner and wait for more information as it comes in the next few weeks. Above all, they should not raise any suspicion. Scanlan assures him that they will keep quiet, but if Assume needs them to act, then he can use the safe word Jenga, as they discussed previously. Keyleth gives Assume a matching corsage, but he declines it, saying it's not his color. Vex then asks Assume if he knows whether the Briarwoods are magic users. He says that the only thing he's heard is that Lady Delilah is an accomplished practitioner of the arcane arts and has studied at a variety of schools across the globe. Vex asks the arcane practitioners in Vox Machina if they are able to see through illusions, and Tiberius says that as long as he knows that it's there, he can. He says that someone would have to have a lot of experience in order to tell that Vax Percy is an illusion, but he doubts that the Briarwoods have that ability. At that point, they hear a horn blow in the background, signaling the arrival of dinner guests. Grog asks Vax Percy if he's ready, and he replies no, but wants to get on with it. Tiberius asks if he would like him to cast a fireball, and Assume cuts in, saying, no, please. None of that. No, please. He also speaks into the room again, telling the real Vax to see if he can follow him into the foyer 10 minutes after the meal starts. Scanlan asks Keyleth if she called ahead to request a vegan meal, and she says yes, and Vax Percy adds she's vegan. Of course she told them. Assume leaves the room, and the group heads to the front of the palace to wait for the rest of the guests. A dark wood carriage pulls in front of the palace, and two individuals emerge, the Lord and Lady Briarwood. As they wait, Arcanist Alora Visorin approaches them and greets them warmly. Vex gives her a hug. Alora immediately notices that Vax Percy is in disguise and greets him carefully as Vax, as to not blow their cover. Tiberius says that Alora looks gorgeous, and they all enter the palace after the Briarwoods, as the Lord and Lady are directed to their chambers by servants. Percy looks to see if he can recognize any of the attendants that came with the Briarwoods, and Vex watches them walk away so that she can read their lips. Percy kind of recognizes one of the servants, but doesn't know his name, and Vex catches some conversation about how long the journey was and that they won't be staying longer than they need to. As they wait, Tiberius flirts with Alora, and she lets them know that she's been caught in some bureaucracy in the city, which she despises, so she's taking some time off for herself. At the end of the conversation, Tiberius asks, once things settle down a bit, perhaps you and I and Grog and Lady Kima go out, break bread, maybe have some wine, and such on an evening with each other. Alora says that it's very flattering and she appreciates the invitation, but she thinks that that particular mix of company may prove to be a bit awkward. Tiberius says, well, of course, if it's awkward, no one wants that. She offers instead to get some tea with Tiberius sometime, just the two of them, and Tiberius agrees and walks away. Travis asks some questions about the carriage of the Briarwoods that they came in, and Scanlan beckons to the real Vax to take him into a shadowy corner and recast invisibility on him, while Keyleth and Vex check out the Council of Tal'Dorei to see if any of them are acting shifty. They get escorted to the dining hall with Alora as they chat and are led to the main table set for about 20 people. They all head to find their seats, and eventually Lord and Lady Briarwood enter to take theirs. Then the Sovereign Uriel and the Empress are announced. Uriel formally greets the Briarwoods and introduces the rest of the dining party, going around the table to name each member of the council as well as each member of Vox Machina, excluding the real Vax and Pike, of course. The real Vax drinks the potion of climbing and scurries up the wall behind the Briarwoods, and dinner commences as the servants fill their glasses and conversation starts to build. Urian starts talking with Lord Briarwood about the proposed bridge that is the foundation of his dealings with the Briarwoods, a trade route that will make the passage of goods much easier between the two continents, and Lady Briarwood brings up that they heard that an attempt was made on Uriel's life last winter's crest. Uriel says that the attempt was thwarted by Vox Machina, and they have been tremendously helpful in keeping him and his family safe. Vex asks Lady Briarwood where she hails from originally, to which Delilah responds Wildmount, and offers Vex an invitation to come visit them if she's ever in the area. Vex asks how long they've been in Whitestone, and Delilah says she can't remember, but Silas says it's been about 4 to 5 years. He says it was an unfortunate mantle to pick up, but they've done what they can to honor the memory of the former family there. Tiberius asks them if they have any children, and Silas responds, unfortunately not, but they consider many of their esteemed servants and members of the house as extended family and try to leave a legacy however they can. Scanlon asks Silas if he has ever heard of his father, a prominent doctor who may have studied with their acquaintance, Dr. Ripley. He replies, yes, Dr. Ripley has been one of their esteemed physicians in Whitestone and has recently come into land herself, although she's been traveling for some time. Scanlon asks if they are close, and Silas says they aren't necessarily close, but she was one of the people to come with them to Whitestone from Wildmount to help with the organization of the city. Scanlon tells him to tell her next time Silas sees Ripley that his father, Jeff Shorthalt, says hi. Vax Percy says that he's not familiar with the Whitestone and asks Silas how they became such caretakers of such a place. One of the council members starts to interrupt, but Silas says it's quite all right and tells them that before this all occurred, they became very close friends with the DeRollo family about 10 or so years ago. Delilah cuts in and says that the DeRollos were traveling through Wildmount on holiday when they first met. Apparently, the family had been through a very bad storm, and the Briarwoods opened up their homestead to them, giving them dry clothes and food for the night. She says that a fast friendship was forged after that. Since then, she says that they've gone on many trips together over the years, but as time went on, they all got busy and went their separate ways, losing contact with each other until the DeRollos started talking about this bridge project about 5 years ago. The Briarwoods decided to join in on the venture, but unfortunately, the DeRollos were struck by an awful disease. She says that they were surprised that they even considered leaving Whitestone to the Briarwoods upon their death, but they couldn't say no. She says they wanted to carry on their legacy and continue the building of the bridge. Tiberius says they are courageous, and Vax Percy proposes a toast to gracious hosts. Silas continues his conversation with Uriel, speaking about the export of timber from Whitestone and how they've had a rising danger in the surrounding woods, making it difficult recently. He asks Uriel if he can send some soldiers to help clear out the forest, and Uriel agrees easily. Elith also adds that Vox Machina is free as well to help. As the meal continues on, more conversations arise, mostly bureaucratic bullshit, and Tiberius asks Alora if she ever finished making that extra message earring that they spoke about. She says it has been completed and is ready for whenever anyone wants to pick it up. She also says that she's about a month away from completing the transportation sigil in the basement of Grayskull Keep. Tiberius thanks her and asks her what flavor tea she likes, with Alora responding that she prefers mint or jasmine. After that, he awkwardly stands up and leaves the table as Vax Percy speaks to Delilah, saying that it was an act of compassion to take on Whitestone as their responsibility. He asks if Vox Machina might be of service to them, and Vex says they are quite handy, with Keyleth interjecting that they killed a beholder once. Delilah says that is quite impressive, young Keyleth, and she compliments Uriel, saying he keeps the presence of some mighty heroes. He agrees, saying that they are proven allies, but he may have something coming up that he will use Vox Machina for himself. Keyleth rolls an insight check to see if Delilah can see through Vax Percy's disguise, but rolls low. Tiberius looks to see if the Briarwoods are carrying any arcane items and sees a necklace on Delilah, as well as some other items, like everyone else at the table. Grog interjects, saying that they also killed an illithid, and Vax Percy says they both befriended and killed one, with Tiberius adding that it betrayed them, so they killed it. Scanlon changes topic and asks what disease it was that killed the DeRollos. Silas says that they don't know. They were only notified about the deaths a month or two after they died. Keyleth asks if the entire family died, and Silas says that most of the castle fell to it as well. Uriel offers his condolences, and Vex adds, I know how it feels to lose someone close to you, and says she's sorry for their loss. Keyleth asks for more particulars, asking whether they were afraid to go into the castle after the disease ran rampant. Were they worried about contracting the disease themselves? Silas says they were worried, but they made sure to send in their best clerics to clear the castle ahead of time. At this point, the dessert is brought out, and Vex watches their lips as they whisper to each other. She sees them saying things like, "Did you notice him?" and "Yes, don't worry," and "Tonight we'll stay." Vex asks them how long they plan on staying in town, and Delilah says they will be on their way in a few days, only staying long enough to finalize the paperwork for the construction of the bridge. Vex replies that if they don't have plans for tomorrow, then she would love to give them a tour of Amon. Delilah says that they will send word to Grayskull Keep when they have the time, and Tiberius says that Vex loves showing people their city, with Vex saying that perhaps Delilah can show her some more of her fashions since she loves Delilah's dresses so much. Delilah says that she should really go to the Wildmount Fashion District. Their designs are divine. Grog looks at Vax Percy and asks if anyone is interested in having dessert. Tiberius says that he is having some, and then Vax Percy asks Vax Percy if he would like a fireball creme brulee. Vax Percy says that he is fine, and dinner starts to wind down. Members of the council start to excuse themselves, and Uriel and the Empress take their leave, thanking the Briarwoods for attending. Delilah and Silas also stand up and wish them all a fine night. Tiberius interrupts them and says, "Before you leave," and launches into a very elaborate explanation and demonstration of Draconian magic, while the real Vax clicks his boots of haste and scuttles across the ceiling and out of the room. The real Vax looks to see if Secret Assume is still waiting for him in the foyer, but doesn't see him anywhere, so he returns to the dining hall just as Silas thanks Tiberius for his display of magic and wishes everyone a wonderful night. The Briarwoods leave, and the real Vax follows them to their room as Vex Hunters marks Delilah. 2 guards are standing outside of the Briarwoods room, and they enter, closing the door behind them. The real Vax yanks off his serpent belt and throws it into the hallway in front of the guards, turning it into a live snake. One of the guards starts trying to stomp on it while one stays at the door, so real Vax drops to the ground and hits the remaining guard in the temple with the pommel of his dagger to knock him out. The guard falls like a sack of potatoes, and real Vax grabs the door handle, opening it and stealthing inside. As soon as he enters the guest room, he sees Delilah taking off her jewelry while Silas stands next to the bed, both looking in his direction. Real Vax lies, putting on an accent, saying that he heard a noise in here and he works for the city, and he apologizes for disturbing them. He uses his last luck of the day to roll a deception check, but only gets an 11. Silas says not to worry, and Delilah asks what exactly Real Vax does for the city. He says he's a guard and heard something, but perhaps he was mistaken. He turns to leave the room halfway through the threshold of the door, but Delilah says that he looks strangely similar to a gentleman they just met at dinner, and then casts hold person on him. They approach and pull him into the room, as Silas says, "Don't worry, you look delicious." And that's where they end the episode. So, what do we think of the second half?
This is where things really get started.
Oh, yeah.
It's I mean, even now I've I first listened to this episode at least a year or two ago, and it still just blows my mind just how exciting it is, and even all the iterations I've seen of it, in The Legend of Vox Machina and all of these things, and even just hearing it again, you describe it, I'm like, oh, this is where things really get exciting. It's where things really get started, and just with all the Briarwood stuff, and oh, I love it so much.
Yeah, I mean, we've been saying this a lot in the last few episodes, but there's so many little things that are happening here, and these little things turn into big things.
Yeah.
I don't want to do any spoilers, but it's very important that Scanlan's using his spells for invisibility already, and Vax is using up all of his lucks already, and
Yes.
there's a lot of little decisions that have happened throughout this whole episode that are going to put them in a very particular situation.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. But just, yeah, I mean, obviously, this is where, the whole Whitestone arc is, what they started with The Legend of Vox Machina, as much as, there was content before this, and there was important content before this dinner, this whole thing that we're building up to is really where I feel the campaign starts. And it's a shame that so many people, as we've spoken before, completely understand why people skip past Orion. It's really a shame that like this would mean this is one of the episodes.
Mm-hmm.
This one and the next one are ones that they would miss out on with that, because they really are
Yeah.
so important.
Yeah. And like when we're looking at themes too, I think we're moving into an era of increased subtlety for the group.
Yes.
Like I think up until this point, it's been very like monster of the weekish, which is
Mm-hmm.
understandable for a D&D format. I mean, we see that in all forms of media, whether it's a movie or TV show or, you know, a
Mm-hmm.
D&D campaign. Is like it's a very easy formula to rely on. Is like, you know, this week is this dungeon, this week is this dragon, you know, whatever you want for fill in the blank. But now they're being faced with having to deceive on a whole nother level. Now
Mm-hmm.
they're being faced with having to navigate court politics and like play the parts. Like obviously Grog is completely ill-equipped to do
Yeah.
any of this, you know, and I think even as much as Vax and Vex rely on their charming abilities as like based on their backstories, like growing up in Sigorn, Singorn, there, that's the word, Singorn, like they have a noble-ish backstory still, and they're still struggling to find footing
Mm-hmm.
within this new context that they now find themselves in. Like they aren't just fuck arounds anymore. Like they have the ear of an emperor and empress of an entire continent. Like,
Yeah.
and now they're going after or being pitted against a lord and lady who have significant ties, who have significant resources, significant experience, significant knowledge. Like it's a big ask.
It is. And like another part of this is that this is like where in the campaign it starts to get like really personal. Like obviously this whole thing with even just the Briarwood showing up just like digs so deeply into Percy's backstory and Percy's trauma. And like we have dug into backstory a bit in the past, because we did have like Keyleth continuing
Mm-hmm.
her Aramente and stuff
Yeah.
like that. But like this digs deep.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're like, we've been talking about nuance, we've been talking about subtlety, we've been talking about those little things that actually do make a big difference. And I think the group is about to be smacked in the face with all of this.
Oh, absolutely. And it's cool too to see, because like this time they're actually like, before they've been like goofing off, they've made plans and they
Yeah.
like haven't gone well, or like they've had to
Yeah.
like scramble and improvise. And like this time they actually seem to be having more of a grasp on what they're doing. This is probably some of the most coordinated I've
Mm-hmm.
seen of them, which makes it
Mm-hmm.
interesting where things go in the next episode, which obviously I won't touch on. But
Yeah.
it's like they really do seem to be like finding their like footing as a group and
Yeah.
like playing to each other's strengths and working
Mm-hmm.
together.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's part of their arc as a group is
Mm-hmm.
learning to rely on each other rather than just being these individualistic characters. Like I think all of them came from a more individualistic background of it's like me against the world kind of
Yeah.
deal, which is very common for D&D characters,
Oh
right?
yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, you're going to get farther ahead from group effort more so than individual effort. And
Mm-hmm.
this, I think, is where they start. Maybe this is the joining that we've been missing since the Trial of the Take episodes.
Yeah.
You know, now that they have a common enemy again,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there's more cohesion present.
Oh, absolutely. And even just like the fact that like, 'cause they've had like common enemies before since then, but just the fact that it's such a big and powerful common enemy.
Yeah.
And it's like there's no room for error here
Yeah.
because things could so easily go sideways.
Yeah. It's funny, there's this phrase that people talk about. I mean, like, I'm an author, and so, like, in the world of writing, a lot of people say that, like, information is the enemy of tension. And I think that that's what we're dealing with here, is because they don't know jack shit about the Briarwoods. No one
No.
knows jack shit about the Briarwoods. Even Seeker Assume doesn't know shit about the
Hmm.
Briarwoods. And so they don't know what they're getting into by any means.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, they really don't.
I mean, we're seeing that kind of paralleled in the current campaign that they're in right now with
Hmm.
Hell's Hells, but it's just interesting to see that pop up time and time again.
Absolutely.
Any other themes or metaphors that you're picking up here?
Ooh. Well, I mean, it only just brushes into it, but I really that scene at the end before they drop off with
Mm,
like the Briarwoods catching, like
yeah.
it's it's just such a good scene, and it's also like you can see it also like really plays into like like um plays into Vax's like bisexuality too, because you can
Mm,
get that there's even though they're like evil, there's also this like little bit of like sense of like sexual tension, especially with the delicious, the
yeah.
double meaning of the
Yeah.
delicious there. And it's
Yeah.
just like it's so good. I literally remember as I was saying the first time I listened to this episode and the episode after this, I had on headphones and I was listening to it while I was vacuuming the house, and it's so interesting so I can remember exactly where I was at each point in the house for the points of the episode that I was listening to while I was vacuuming, just because it was there's so much going on
Yeah.
and it just captured my like attention
Yeah.
so well. But
Yeah.
just like, yeah, just that moment, I'm sure uh depending on what you brush on next episode, you might talk more about it because obviously the scene continues next
Yeah.
episode, but just
Yeah.
like that moment of capture and like you
Yeah.
just kind of begin to see the charm of the Briarwoods and how they got as far as they did. Because during the dinner, it was more like they were answering questions, they were like dodging questions, like
Mhm.
very like they were doing it very well for
Mhm.
like all believable answers for people who had no idea what was going on. But this is
Yeah.
where when they're like alone with only one other person
Yeah.
that they like you really get to see
Yeah.
their charm and abilities
Yeah.
unleash fully because they're not so worried about their cover if it's just one
Mhm.
other person who they want to eliminate.
Mhm. I mean, I think it's like these nuances, the little things add extra dimensionality to these characters.
Hmm.
And I think that's what hooks us and brings us back time and time and time again, because we love multidimensional characters, because that's
Yeah.
how humans are. Like, we're flawed, we have goals, we have fears, we have dreams, we have, challenges that we're grappling with, and not everyone is just like a two-dimensional cardboard cutout
Hmm.
masquerading as a human being. And I think that's what starts to make these characters so hook worthy.
Yeah.
You're talking about, this is the episode where you start getting pulled into it, where you have photographic memories of where you were when you first
Hmm.
experienced it. And I love seeing, I watch the YouTube videos when I'm prepping for these, and like when you fast forward or go back, you can see the little like graph of where people,
Yeah.
come back into the episode and where people start. And it's always
Hmm.
so funny to see like where those spikes hit throughout the
Yeah.
episode. It's like, yes, everyone does love this scene because of what you were talking about, because of that extra dimensionality, because of that tension that we're also
Hmm.
creating, because we're also seeing Vax as this character who just rushes into things. Like, we have a very strong contrast between Tiberius rushing into things and Vax rushing into things at this point in that campaign.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting to see like how the group reacts to each of them, and also like the different nuances between their two decision making frameworks that they're using. Because we also see like Tiberius within this episode does express some regret over his previous fuck offedness like that.
Yeah.
But then we also just turn right back around and see Vax do the same fucking thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And they get into an argument about it.
They do. It's interesting too to compare and contrast the characters, as we often do when we're talking about Tiberius, when we see similar traits, like how it's done. Like, yes, like Vax rushes into things, but it's also like usually when he rushes into things, it's still in the same direction that the party is going, or like even if he's going against what the party is wanting to do, it's still to further some of the same goals. Whereas Tiberius, when he rushes into things, it's just all because he has his own plan. He's not working in cohesion with the party at all. He's not thinking about the party at all. Because that's another thing too. In D&D, it's perfectly fine to like split off like from the party and do your own thing, as long as you're still keeping the party in mind and you're not ruining the fun for everyone else or ruining what everybody else is planning. And I think that is the difference, is that Liam seems to have this like acknowledgement of like, oh yeah, like Vax is going to go do this thing, but it's not going to like, it might cause some like inter-party tension, but it's not going to like mess with like what the players are doing. Whereas with Tiberius and Orion, he's like, he just wants to make himself look good, or to like protect his character when he thinks his character might be in danger, or like things like that. And it just does not work for the benefit of the party of the whole at all, or for the story. Because that's another thing too, is you might have your character like deviate from the party for the sake of like a story and that conflict. Whereas it's clear that Orion is just thinking about like Tiberius and himself.
Yeah.
And not thinking about making a good story, and not thinking about the benefit of the party.
Absolutely. And I think it's important that you brought up motivation, because I'm also thinking about like Grog also has a tendency to run off, right?
Oh yeah.
Things that are completely counter to the group. Because like, you know, we see that with like him and his fight with Cord, and we also see various examples of this much later in the campaign when we have certain things that happen with a certain deck of many things. But I feel like Vax's motivations come from a place of like, I'm rushing out for other people, right?
Yeah.
Tiberius comes from the motivation of like, I'm rushing out for me. While Grog, I think, is just pure chaos.
Oh yeah, I think the motivation Travis has behind them is just like, Grog is low intelligence. He's just rushing out because he's not thinking things through. He's not thinking about the consequences. He just sees something he wants, and so he goes and does it.
Yeah. It's very funny. I also recently I messaged you about this, I think yesterday, but I've been watching through all the one shots for Critical Role, and I just watched Grog's one shot the other day.
Oh cool, I haven't seen that one yet.
It's so good. It's so funny. Like, he basically, Travis runs the D&D game as Grog, and the players are like Vex, Scanlan, Percy, and I forget who the fourth is, but it's just hilarious to see like him as a DM, like Grog as a DM. He's like, whatever, he'll like roll something and make up a number, you know, and he'll just be like, whatever, I'm just gonna make up this rule. Who cares? And it's just so in character for him. And I think that that's a perfect example to like look at the motivation behind these character decisions more so than the decisions themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think leads us into the next question of what personal experiences come up for us, because I can definitely think of times where I have looked at the behavior more so than the motivation of people around me.
Yeah, I think I am often the opposite. I think I, in the past, have been so focused on the motivation of people
Hmm.
that I think it's one of those things, as we talk about so often, that has to have a balance.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you focus just on the behavior and not on the motivation, you can get caught up in like what people are doing and not why. And it can lead to like misunderstandings because you interpret something, misinterpret their motivation because you're like, oh, like this hurt me, so they must be doing this intentionally. And like if you don't like communicate and get to the root of that, you might not have like the source of, like you might not be able to work through that because you're just focused on the hurt. But on the flip side, and the side that I've often found myself in, is that I've been so focused on like people's motivations and people saying that like, oh, they don't mean it, or thinking that they must have a reason for
Hmm.
things, that sometimes I have completely ignored how something has been hurting me and have gotten myself into some really bad situations because I'm like, oh, they don't mean it. And because I'm focusing on the motivations and not the behaviors and how it's hurting me, it ends up like hurting me more because I'm excusing it. And so it's the
Hmm.
sort of thing that you have to find a balance,
Yeah,
I think.
absolutely.
Because if you focus just on the behaviors and not motivations, then like, yeah, as I was saying, it like does not work for conflict resolution. It does not work for understanding or working well with others. It doesn't work for like, yeah, working as a group and teamwork.
Hmm.
But there are also situations where, like, say, if somebody is being like genuinely abusive, where the motivations don't matter,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
because you hear it all the time from abusive people where it's like, oh yeah, like I don't mean to do this, and like all the like gaslighting, and however much, whether they mean their words or not, it doesn't change the fact that like the person is being abused. So I think it depends on situation to situation. It depends on, like, it's this balance, as with everything that we have
yeah,
to find.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, you do have to look at both because it also depends on what exactly the behavior is. Like if you crash your
Exactly.
friend's car, like all
Yeah,
tensions could be great, but the car is still fucking totaled.
exactly. But like, say if it's something like, oh, like somebody like eats the last cookie that you were hoping to have
Sure.
for later, that's something that's just like, oh, that can be like talked
Yeah.
out and sorted
Yeah.
out. And
Yeah. And if the
like,
motivation was like maliciously eating the last cookie, then
yeah, then
that's what
that's
we want
one
to
thing.
focus on more so than the act of eating the cookie.
Exactly, exactly. Or it could be that like somebody genuinely didn't know and the cookies were like there to be shared and you both had your sights set on it and like hadn't communicated to each other.
Yeah.
And so it's just like as like the it says the motivations, like, yeah, motivations don't always excuse behavior, but they are important for understanding the behavior and figuring out how to deal with conflict in situations.
Yeah, and I can also think of some personal experiences too where like I've been in situations like a formal dinner, like I not specifically a formal dinner, but situations like formal dinners where
Hmm.
like you have to be very careful about what you say, you have to be very careful about like what you do in that kind of environment and having to like communicate with other people silently about like
Hmm.
things that are happening and how difficult that can be of like, you're looking at someone, you're like,
Yeah.
and you can't say anything in that situation, or this is not the best situation to say that thing in. And that I think is also a very tricky line to navigate as well. And I can definitely think of certain situations where like ideally I would like to pull that person aside and like talk about our next moves for how we want to handle it, but that this is not the time or place to do that.
Hmm.
So I also have to make some snap decisions on my own and just hope for the best.
Yeah, exactly.
I definitely relate with Vax in that regard as well, of being
Hmm.
like, I made a decision and I made like there was no way I could communicate that to any of you guys. So
Yeah,
they're going to be what they are.
exactly.
But
We don't
that's
always have the luxury of talking everything through.
yeah, which also goes to the whole like motivation and behavior thing.
Hmm.
Like if Vax had decided to go out to the carriage instead of going up to the Briarwoods room, I think they would have had a different reaction to that than,
Yeah.
no matter what his motivation was.
Hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, What are we going to do about it?
Yeah, I think it's just as often these are as more like reminders for me. It's just like as I deal with, because I'm stepping up, as I have talked to you about, I've recently taken a full-time position at my job,
Mm,
which means that while we all are like equal in terms of staff, I'm going to have like a little bit more like authority and a little bit more like of like perceived power because
mm,
of like the fact that I'm there all the time, the fact that the full-time staff can like make certain decisions that like other people can't as much, or like mostly by the fact that I'm there more than most of the people, because most of the staff at my job are like relief or only have part-time lines because there's a limited amount of full-time positions just based on the nature of the job. And like just thinking about how by stepping up into that position I am probably going to like encounter more conflict because I'm going to have to be a bit more bold about like my own opinions and like my own like judgment about what I think
mm,
is like the best direction
mm,
for like what we're doing. Oftentimes I found that I've just kind of like set aside and just let other people do what they want, even if I don't entirely agree with it. But
mm,
now, like as full-time staff, I can't just let people, not that people are like walking all over me. I just haven't been bold enough to like
mm,
share when I disagree and talk through things. And I think that there are certain personalities at my job that is going to clash with a bit more than others, for people who will like expect me
mm,
to like go along with like the same things. But I think it's just like an important reminder for me is that like even if I need to be more bold in my things, to also still like listen to what they're saying, figure out motivations, and like use that as a way to like I am a very conflict avoidant person, so oftentimes when I get into conflict and I get like set on like, okay, I need to deal with this, I kind of can be a bit more like bulldozy about it.
mm.
So I just need to remind myself that when I am in that situation where I'm like, yes, this is like a hill that I need to die on, like to like be like, to also like can remind myself to also consider other people and where they're coming from, and maybe come up with a more, rather than like a butting heads direction, more of a like, oh, okay, let's find like a compromise and go together. And
Yeah,
like I think in general I'm very good at the compromise route, but it's just like in those moments where I'm just like, okay, like when I try to, when I need to psych myself up, I'm like, and being like, okay, I can't like I, it's important to me that I'm state my opinion and I'm strong in my opinion about this, to remind myself that that doesn't mean like necessarily like butting heads. Of course, it depends on the personality. Other people might butt heads
sure.
regardless,
Yeah.
but it's just more of a reminder for me in my direction as I take on things with the current dynamic of my workplace.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've also been talking a lot about balance lately, and it just came to mind when you were talking. It's like we don't necessarily have to die on every hill, but maybe like
Yeah.
rest on hills. Like,
Yeah, rest
let's
on
have like
hills.
some type of middle ground here where like it's not like I'm dying for this point, but like I'm resting on this point. Like it's
Yeah.
important enough to like sit on it, but
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
important enough to die on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and, like, I think for me, it's not only a matter of recognizing nuance in other people, but also appreciating and encouraging nuance in other
Mhm.
people. Like, I think we get so consumed by labels. I think we've touched on this before, but, like, this person's good, this person's bad, this person's liberal, this person's conservative, this person's smart, this person's stupid, this person's pretty, this person's ugly, you know? And I think we need to not only recognize the nuances of these individuals that we're labeling, but also encourage those individuals themselves to own the nuances that come to light as well.
Mhm.
Like I come to this a lot. I do a lot of advising for businesses in terms of marketing, and so many people believe that they need to fit some sort of predefined cookie cutter image in order to be marketable. And
Mhm.
that's not necessarily the case, especially nowadays in today's markets. Like what differentiates you, which puts you outside of the crowd, is your ability to not only value and accept your nuances, but showcase them and be like, yes, I sell life insurance, but I sell life insurance in this way. That's what differentiates you from the market. Or
Yeah.
yes, I write fantasy romance novels, but I write fantasy romance novels in this way, and that's what makes me different. And I think that's a reminder for myself to have it go both ways. Like, yes, I do recognize and accept and showcase nuances within myself, and I should also recognize, accept, and showcase nuances in other people as well,
Yeah.
instead of just automatically labeling them like, oh, this is good, this is bad, this is, whatever label you want to attach to it.
Yeah.
Because it can just get so polarizing that way, and it's like, all
Oh,
right,
absolutely.
let's see people as human beings.
Exactly.
Because it's a lot out there nowadays.
It is a lot out there. And I feel like there are times like for things to be polarized, but there are also not every issue has to be a polarizing issue.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's an important point for sure. For sure. I mean, I don't know if I have anything else to add to that beyond don't stereotype people,
Oh yeah.
including yourself.
Including yourself. Let yourself have nuance.
Yeah, 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 and value that nuance. Don't think it's like something that's abnormal or malignant or something that needs to be like pushed back into place, like
Exactly.
you're allowed to color outside the lines. Like,
Exactly. It just reminds me really of like all of the like different discourse in the queer community of like what identities are allowed and which ones are
mm,
not. When my take on the whole thing is really like why if being queer is about stepping outside of boxes, like
yeah,
why would we go and like
make new
make new
boxes.
boxes by
Yeah,
like, oh, this is what it means to like trans people can only experience this, or
yeah,
like
yeah,
lesbians can only experience this, when
yeah,
really like I'm all for if somebody says it's their identity, I'm not gonna question it. And
yeah,
that's where I stand on all of these takes and discourse surrounding things like he, him, lesbians, or
yeah.
all of the different like like neopronouns and
Well,
like
we can
all
even
of
talk about
things like
TERFs, like,
perps. Yeah, that's they exist to be like put people in boxes and stuff
yeah,
like that and like divide people up, and like that's really in like like the people what people who like are in power who like don't who want to like eliminate the queer community, as we are seeing through all this legislation in the United States. Like they want people to be polarized and separate and to like tear
yep,
each other up over these
yep,
minuscule issues. It makes their job easier.
yep,
And so I really think that especially now, but always, it's like important for the queer community to stand together and not dictate what people can and can't experience and
yeah,
can and can't like label themselves as.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah,
I love it. You can label yourself. I have nothing against labels, but accept that the labels have nuance to them. Like,
exactly.
language, communication, being a human being in general is a subjective, imperfect, continually changing thing. And we can't
Yeah,
just like stick a stick in the mud and be like, all right, this is what all queer people are like. This is what all lesbians are like. This is what all
exactly.
black people are like, like we can't do that. And we just
Hmm.
need to recognize that.
Yeah,
But at the same time,
exactly.
if you like the label, go for it.
It's like how I often hear it described. It's kind of like cats. Cats hate it if
Mhm.
you put them in a box, but
Yeah,
they're perfectly happy to go and sit in the box themselves if it's their own choice. And
absolutely.
so that's the metaphor that I always
I
think
love
of
that.
with this is like let people decide what labels they do or do not want, regardless
Mhm.
of what you would experience to be.
Yeah,
Um but and like don't assign labels yourself, let people define who they are and what those labels mean to them, because as you were saying there's no like one way to be everything, so different people interpret different labels differently, and
yeah.
as long as it's not interpreting them in like a bigoted way, um then I say like let people interpret them how they want.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I like ending on that. If there's anything else you want to add before we wrap up.
I can't think of anything else to add.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is definitely in the vein of this community as well. Like, I think a lot of people in this community are having these conversations. And so I'm glad that we're bringing this conversation to this podcast as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, per usual, this is powerful stuff that we're talking about here in audience. We definitely encourage you to join the discourse. You know, we want to know how you're feeling about all of this stuff as well. So please share your own thoughts and insights and stories with us as well. We'd love to know how Critical Role has impacted you in your own lives. So special thanks to Petall for joining me on this episode. It's been a pleasure.
It's been wonderful to be here and talk about these topics as always.
Yes, and we are ramping up for some very exciting content. So stay tuned. Next time, we'll be discussing Campaign 1, Episode 25, Part 1, and joining me will be Atlas, so I'm excited for that. As always, I'm always looking for more co-hosts and guests, so if you're interested in coming on the series, just hit me up and I'll send you the link. In the meantime, please comment, like, subscribe below, follow us on Tumblr at Sacred Reading CR, and until next time, may all beings be peaceful, may all beings be free, and be the chaotic good you wish to see in the world. Take care, guys.